Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you discover this discussion with the new Untouchables. This is our 34th episode, and actually the second in a series this morning on Friday, August 22nd, 2025, at approximately 9 a.m. my time. And we welcome this time because of just scheduling conflicts, and we're happy to see you and we're happy to have you here. Marc Dan of Dan Law, former AG of Ohio, and of course, joined to my left, of course, is June Carbone, the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. And then below her, Mr. Black, William K. Black, economist, attorney, regulator, criminologist, and really all things somebody who has the ideas and answers of how we can turn the tables on the monstrosity that we're all in the midst of. But as we were approaching this particular dialogue, Marc, I wanted to open this up because in our previous conversations, we've had a plan, specifically through your apparatus and your initiative to respond to Trump overreach as it relates to tariffs, especially ICE. And of course, we've discussed Section 230 that protects tech oligarchs and the monstrosity of what is propaganda, proliferation of propaganda online. But in my backyard, just yesterday, there was an arrest of a violinist who is also a conductor of our local symphony that was educated at our university, who was an immigrant from South Korea. And I don't know all the ins and outs, but he was arrested and is now in some, I'm going to call it a gulag in Colorado. And this is, I think, the third Utah that I'm aware of that has been picked up by ICE of, let's just say, questionable scenarios. And I wanted to bring that to your attention, because as John Bolton has been raided by the FBI, as the Federal Reserve is capitulating, just like tall building law firms and media, to Donald Trump and what it looks like is happening in the markets as a result of it, we're still dealing with this ongoing sort of scenario with all things ICE. I'm wondering if I can get an opening comment from you, about kind of the state of play, particularly as it relates to these three initiatives that you've identified.
Yeah, well, so actually, I had some positive progress. We had a meeting with the Cleveland Metro Bar Association. I started home, right, yesterday, and they are interested in using, almost every local bar association has a lawyer referral mechanism. And we were talking about the number of calls they're getting related to these types of issues, and and there's a little bit of pushback because the immigration lawyers in town, of course, say, well, nobody can be trained quickly to do immigration law. I probably say the same thing about consumer lawyers. Well, you can't just have a seminar and then go out and represent consumers. But in a crisis like this, I think that's exactly what needs to start to happen. And then we talked a lot. They had an open forum, which by the way, sadly, very few members of the bar attended. There was an earlier forum with the ABA president who was here, and he spoke, and it was a larger turnout for that. But one of the reasons it was a larger turnout is because the bar decided not to take attendance of who was there, so there's no record of who came to that meeting. This one, they actually had a list of people who came, and you had to sign up. And it was much more sparse, and nobody from the taller building law firms in town were there. But I was encouraged by a couple of things. I mean, one is that the metro bars are among the few, and now they're getting heat from the Ohio State Bar Association and pushback on what they're doing. But they've developed a very elaborate, as only lawyers can do, system for responding to what's going on in the world. And actually, when the rule of law is under attack, to be able to issue quickly statements, at least in favor, explaining the bar's position and why what's happening is not consistent with the rule of law. But the discussion was about expanding that to matching lawyers, as we've been talking about, with people who are in need. There's a huge problem with nonprofits. There are lots of small nonprofits. Legal aid is at absolute capacity for the work that they can do for those nonprofits. They need lawyers. That's something that's a little more accessible, a little less opaque than immigration law. So I think there's a broader group of people that are already trained to deal with um, the funding issues and it's a litigator issue as much as anything else. Um, but we also talked about expanding the conversation to the public to try to come up with and to take it out to the public to do seminars on what to do if you see a masked man walk in the room and start abducting people. What are your rights? What are your responsibilities as a citizen? What and I mean, beyond documenting what's happening, what should you do if you're the person being abducted? What should you do? And what is the you know what safety plan should you have if you're a family of people in a particular color that seem to be targeted regularly by these folks. Although they're obviously expanding beyond people from Central America and Latin America. They're to people from Asia, from people from the Middle East. It's so I think that's good. I mean that there's some progress with that. But bar or historic organizations move slowly. And the work, by the way, that the Cleveland Bar was doing was actually highlighted at the ABA conference, which just took place last week in Toronto, the American Bar Association. So I feel good that they're on the right track. The heart's in the right place, which is and the place where that's happening is outside of New York, outside of Washington, where everybody makes their living on government influence. But in places like Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati and Des Moines and St. Louis and Minneapolis, where hopefully those metro bars can be a vehicle. Because one of the challenges has been this is an overwhelming need to do something. What can we harness that has the resources to do it? So I'm hoping that will catch on, and I think the bar leadership here is interested in sharing their model with other places and expanding it and sharing the expanded features as they go. So that was somewhat encouraging that there were at least 20 people that made it to a meeting on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of the summer to talk about how we as a profession can continue to start to really do something. But I still don't have a great answer for this. I mean, so many lawyers I talk to are horrified by what's going on, and they ask me, "What can I do?" And so, I've been trying to collect organizations and places where they can. We had one on can't remember the name of the organization. It was on a recent podcast that we did. But they reached out to me afterwards, and I've been referring people there. There is a immigrants law referral process that's out there, and I should probably provide all that to you, Patrick, and we can disseminate it through this platform. So,
well, I wonder if you're referring to the Government Accountability
yeah, the
Program.
Government Accountability Task Force. So
Oh,
they reached
okay.
out. They've already given us an assignment, and I have referred a number of other lawyers to them who have reached out to us through this process and in my other activities in the consumer and bankruptcy bar, and referred them to because there are plenty there. Also, there's an organization to support government employees who are being mistreated and fired without cause or due process. And there's lots of good employment lawyers out there, and who are well trained to take that on, and they're not all in firms that are conflicted by the Trump executive orders. I'm hopeful that this is going to start to get a little traction in people's worlds.
Well, just a quick follow-up to you, Marc, before we move on. A couple of things that I've been curious and I've wanted to ask you for a few weeks. Look, there were I don't know, it just seems like there was a lot of activity with people's videos of ICE being over the top in terms of the violent sort of approach behind the masks and everything else all over, the country. We saw incredible stuff from Cincinnati, Ohio. I don't know if you caught
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
It comes to mind. I know Los Angeles with some others, but it seems like every other day we're seeing this overreach by these masked ICE agents responding in Rodney King-like ways. I don't think that's actually an exaggeration. I mean, I'm seeing brutality, from this, and so that's the first kind of setup. But the second setup that I was curious about was, and I'm asking you that question as a former AG, first
Yeah.
and foremost, and then second of all, the nature of the bar association itself. Look, we're looking at capitulation. We just saw, I think, Kirkland and Ellis, and there was another large, I should say, tall building law firm that has been news has come out that they're providing millions of dollars of pro bono work for the Trump administration, right?
For the Commerce Department.
Oh
Right.
wow, for the Commerce Department. So
Yeah.
so if you could kind of maybe
Yeah.
respond, is the bar something that has, and I know this is maybe for all of you as we kind of consider this downstream, but is the bar under similar vulnerabilities as some of these tall building law firms? Really?
Well, yeah. I mean, so when the ABA issued a strong statement regarding the rule of law, all their federal contracts were immediately terminated. Um, so they have already taken the hit that's there. And but the metro bars are less vulnerable to that because because they don't have those kind of government contracts or government connections. And so that's where I think at the local level bars, at the practice area bars, like our consumer bar, that I'm in, our bankruptcy bar, and there are national bars. The Federal Bar Association has a lot of lawyers who aren't. They have a lot of lawyers who are in those tall building firms, but they have a lot of lawyers who aren't as well. Criminal lawyers could, I think, be quickly trained to do some issues. Every time one of those brutality situations takes place, there ought to be a lawsuit.
Mhm.
And until there is, we haven't done our job. I mean, and they're still shifting attorneys' fees under Section 1983, 42 USC 1983 of the U.S. Of federal law, and damages available, and for constitutional violations. And when they happen, then they need to be sued on. And so, again, moving baby steps here as to how to get people in place to do that. How to match the guy beaten up yesterday with the lawyer that's going to bring the lawsuit tomorrow. But I do think there's a strong sense, if not in the organizational part of it, in the membership of a bar. This should be a real call to arms here for lawyers. And I focused in the past in these calls on uh, the lawyers that collaborated with the Nazis and helped them plan their horrible acts and deeds, and to justify them legally. But I was reminded yesterday that there were a lot of lawyers in Germany that actually fought that and resisted as well. Now, many of them didn't make it through the war, sadly, but there were plenty of lawyers that were pushing back and resisting. And so, what side of this do you want to be on historically? And I think we got a pretty good argument for that. I think we got a great product to sell here. Let's figure out how we can get it in the hands of the people that can benefit from it, and that want to provide it.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that because, Bill, the idea is that, picking up on where we left off earlier, and also, June, I'll leave this kind of open ended to just kind of further discuss this. But, Bill had made the statement in a previous dialogue that we had with David K. Johnston and with Paul Peltier. Bill has created, in addition to what your vision is, Marc, the FIGHT program and the Restore program. And both of these are just brilliant by way of, look, we got to utilize the weapons at our disposal within the legal community, particularly as it relates to state legislatures, right, to be able to bring these lawsuits, but particularly because of what you just mentioned, because we have this relationship now with Lewis Clark and the Government Accountability Project to have a pipeline of whistleblowers, right,
Mhm.
that are going to, a large, shall we say, footprint within the administration itself, and all sorts of interesting and probably gobsmacking revelations that we're going to discover. But what we need more than anything is to amplify these stories above the flood the zone strategy that media, big media, is capitulating to, quite frankly. And I'll bring it back to you, Bill, because as all of this stuff is going on, right? One of the things that we discussed in the last dialogue was, okay, the Federal Reserve, that Donald Trump, in addition to, get weaseling at, well, weaseling, what the, the appeals court in New York did yesterday in terms of, kind of vanquishing the $450 million fine before Letitia James civil settlement. But we were also talking about Trump's going on the offensive against the Fed governor being involved with mortgage fraud and how ridiculous that is, in addition to, quite frankly, a senator from California, Adam Schiff, for the same thing. And this on top of, we've seen an entire campaign of intimidation against elected officials. But now here we're seeing in real time that it looks like Jerome Powell is now capitulating to the interest rate pressure to once again configure what we've seen, that's led up to really all of the financial crises of the last 30 years. It's always this cause and effect. Can you comment about what you're seeing from Jerome Powell and, of course, what's happening at the Federal Reserve?
So about 45 minutes ago, Jerome Powell gave the biggest speech of his life. And this is at the biggest economic conference in the world, and nothing comes close, for the top central bankers. It's Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And should you ever get there, by the way, you can go, stay in cabins, and it has this spectacular view of the Front Range, the Grand Tetons, and such. Highly recommend it. And June and I were both at University of Missouri, Kansas City for some time. And this is one of the bizarre things about the Federal Reserve System with the 12 banks. This regional bank, has a big region, and it extends all the way to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So it's actually their conference made famous over the last decades. So this is something where the chair of the Federal Reserve always comes and gives a really major speech, but it's also in front of the world's top central bankers and the world's top academics in economics and finance dealing with central banks. And the biggest thing for 30 plus years in the United States, if you have anything to do with the Federal Reserve, has been Federal Reserve independence. This has been their mantra. They've published tons of studies that claim that economic performance is vastly greater with independent central bankers, not taking the orders of politicians because the politicians have perverse incentives. Witness the Donald Trumps of the world. So that's the thing they're super proud of. And the Federal Reserve chairman in disgrace, for all of eternity, is the guy under LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who caved in Fed. So the pressures to do the right thing are extraordinary, and you're basically hanging yourself on everything you've said if you do the opposite. And so in advance of this speech, as in yesterday, the Fed obviously put out leak after leak after leak that said Jerome Powell will stand tall and will not bend. And then he gave a speech. And he gave his speech and said, well, actually, we should at our next meeting consider reducing interest rates. Say what? And here is the quote unquote logic, obviously in scare quotes. Tariffs only cause a one-time increase in prices, so you really don't have to worry about them in terms of inflationary pressures. Now, that's insane. I won't even bother with it, but I will note the point that the tariffs are already higher than the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in the Great Depression that were, that are blamed by economists and the Jerome Powells of the world for making greatly more severe and lengthy the Great Depression. But that misses the next point and the Powell's lack of logic about, well, this is only a one-time thing. It can't be important for future inflation. Smoot-Hawley started a competitive increase in tariffs for political reasons that you can understand. Hey, they're screwing us. We got to be tough. We'll make our tariffs even higher than them, right? So over time, Smoot-Hawley initiated a process in which tariffs continued to grow. And that can obviously happen here as well. So it's utter nonsense from a historical perspective. It's utter nonsense from a logical perspective. It's utter nonsense from an economic perspective, what Powell has just said. And it's pointless. He's near the end of his term, right? He's got like 9 months left or something like that, maybe less. All he had to do was remain erect, pun intended, for a few months, and he would have gone out as a hero. And now he's going to be a pathetic figure and his institution. And the broader point is, Marc talked about law appropriately as subject we've talked about, and the importance of the rule of law, but more generally, the importance of institutions, right? So the UK, for example, has very little in the way of a written constitution. Its institutions, its traditions are the bulwarks against basically the rise of authoritarian government. That is largely true of the United States. We obviously had more law, but it is still those institutions. And that's why our fight plan, our restore plan, what Marc is doing, what June has been emphasizing in the legal civil war is all about preserving and using those institutions, not simply to resist, but to fight back. And we've just seen how even the most limited fight back, a deliberately sophomoric fight back, right, by the governor of California, Newsom, has utterly humiliated Trump and sent Fox News into this staggering tizzy. But you only get these effects when you fight back, when you cave. You not only lose substantively, you destroy the institution, you destroy integrity, you destroy professionalism, you destroy your reputation. Why do it if you're a Jerome Powell? Jerome Powell is like me, he's old. There's absolutely no point in caving. And these folks are so desperate that even with actually kind of moderate pressure, he suddenly developed round heels.
Unbelievable points, but I want to turn this to you, June, because I find it really fascinating that, of course, Jerome Powell was never an economist. He was a tall building law firm guy, with all of the prestigious accolades, right? But he ends up coming out of what, Carlyle Group, among other things, and he's been a part of the establishment, right, for decades, which is why he was appointed to begin with, right? And so there's always been this sort of consternation that Jerome Powell is trying to live out his legacy as Volcker, right? To Bill's point. But we continue to see the elite establishments continue to cave in every which way imaginable. All of them, which the last guy standing are really you guys. And that's the whole point of this dialogue with the new untouchables, is that those that know how the system works, those that are at the apex of the system, be they tall building law firms, and we talked about Kirkland and Ellis just a moment ago, be they Paramount Pictures and that subsidiary with 60 Minutes with media that can't do its job because they're going to do a mega merger with Skydance, yada yada yada. But what we ended up, I mean, that was the whole point of what happened in the tobacco lawsuit 4 decades ago. Now it's just fast forward, only worse, and yet you have been telling us from the very beginning. It's this strong man sort of scenario, right? That emanates, from tech in the way that you guys have really been underneath the hood for decades in Silicon Valley and how this whole thing works, but also your expertise in all things. I'm thinking of GE and the CEO of GE, whose name is eluding me at the moment. But these tactics, right? They're all unfolding at the same time, which seems to emanate in parallel what you have taught us from day one about the strongman's role of move things, break things, who cares what the consequences are. And I wonder if you can pick up the ball, particularly as it relates to Peter Thiel and the other side of this stuff as it's all happening with the further infiltration of technology within our government and to what ends.
Well, I think you have to start with the amorality. So I was listening to podcasts this week and listened to two back to back. One was a group who had been at the liberalism conference, and they were talking about abundance. And it was all about how Democrats are feckless. But it's not a news story. And, and it leaves out why Democrats are feckless. Then I turned on the guy who wrote the book, The Haves and the Have-Yachts. And it was such a powerful counterpoint. And what he's describing is something I've seen. So let me start with his description, then I'm going to give mine about Silicon Valley. His description are people in Connecticut. Places like Greenwich, Connecticut are incredibly wealthy. And they've always been incredibly wealthy. And, David Brooks likes to talk about how in the olden days, some of the folks, places like that, old wealth, and modern executives had some sense, maybe limited, but some sense of noblesse oblige, of honor, of integrity, of institutional strength. And part of what he was describing is how that's gone. So I attribute the shift to the rise of Jack Welch at GE in 1980 and people like Milton Friedman, who, and for that matter, Jensen and Meckling, these are all academics who justified the shift toward greed, toward modern corporate compensation, toward the idea that shareholders are all that matters. Forget about employees, forget about customers, forget about the country. I've been talking about that for some time. What he did was to describe the new turn of the screw, the way these elites have become pro-Trump. And they know better. They know Trump isn't very smart. They know Trump does a lot of things that are bad for the country. They even know that he's anti-democratic. They only ask the question, what's in it for me? Well, Silicon Valley is worse in 2 dimensions. I have friends out in Silicon Valley, law professors, they do corporate law. And they said to me before the election, the tech bros are backing Trump. Now, I am not talking about Peter Thiel. I'm not talking about these guys who have some authoritarian vision. I'm talking about more run-of-the-mill multimillionaires. And they were for Trump on a totally transactional base. They said, we know he's going to be bad for the country. We need him. Why? It's one of the things we don't talk about is Silicon Valley is in crisis. There was a boom in 2019, as big in dollar value as the dot-com bubble, not as the percentage of GDP, but in terms of the amount of money going in. And then there was a crash. 78% of startups failed in 2023. Why? Because of high interest rates. It dried up the capital, the venture capital funding, and the new rounds of funding became harder to achieve. Now, what's taken place? What has moved into that space? So first, you actually had the Biden administration doing a good job. Bill likes to describe how everybody's bought. The Biden administration moved aggressively on antitrust and consumer protection in some areas. And the people affected by that didn't forgive Biden. They funded Trump's recovery. They funded the defeat of Sherrod Brown in Ohio. I'm delighted to see he's running again. Now, what are the tech bros doing? And again, this is a change. It's not the same as the change in finance or the change in Greenwich, Connecticut, but it's parallel. So Ellen Pao, who is famous for her sex discrimination, sexual harassment claims against Kleiner Perkins, one of the uh, big venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, she liked to talk about how it used to be dominated by the boys who were into tech. They liked their gadgets. And how at some point, and mostly after the Facebook IPO, where Zuck became a billionaire, it became dominated by the people who simply wanted to be rich. They no longer cared about the tech, they cared about being rich. And the other thing that happened parallel to that is companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon that began as scrappy startups have grown up, and they have grown up into a world where platforms exerting monopoly-like power is what makes a whole lot of money. And they now buy up startups that have cool new technology that might threaten their dominance. So we went from a startup world that was pretty obnoxious and law-breaking, but at least was into cool new gadgets, to a tech world that is now gorillas, 1,000-pound gorillas fighting each other for dominance. And dominance, not just, who's going to beat Elon Musk as the richest man in the world, not just that, but how can we screw you? And those platforms, and again, the Silicon Valley types now are like the Greenwich, Connecticut financiers. They ask, what's in it for me? And they have this mindset. Hey, if I'm not stabbing the other guy in the back, I'm going to be a loser in the quest for global domination, which is what this is about. We've already seen how they use these algorithms on social media to empower the worst actors, the haters, the white supremacists, the Nazis, outright Nazis. And their next move into AI is without regard to the dangers of AI. But I think the much more immediate danger is going to be electricity prices spiking. If you look at the numbers, and Paul Krugman had a column out this morning with all the data, since Trump took office, energy prices have spiked, contributing to inflation. And a big part of the reason is AI. And while the increase began under Biden, Trump has said, hey, you want to have a massive bubble? That means more money for me. And he expects the crash to come after he leaves office. And that may be true. But there's a lot coming down the pike with these guys locked into competition with each other, otherwise out of control, knowing Trump is bad for the United States and saying, we don't care because we got what we paid for, complete deregulation.
Well, Marc, that's an incredible setup for you. And I'm going to see if hopefully I can get this right because of just all of the things that my mind is stimulated by based on June's analysis there. But just one quick comment. The thing that's terrifying to me, and it just infuriates me is this notion of government contracts for somebody like Palantir to be able to get the data that's used against us in every which way to Sunday to exploit us, the American people, by burying people at the same time on a mass level that's providing billions of dollars for these guys, and more control, world domination. That's exactly what it is. But, someone like Marc, who's been in the trenches forever, who holds power to account, who was the only attorney general in the United States during the great financial crisis to do the work that the entire Department of Justice should have done to bring RICO indictments and convictions against those that deserved it because it was an organized crime, right? And so, Marc, there were two things that June brought to bear in that I think tee you up exactly right. The first is this notion of the algorithm, right? And I think it was Marc Ellison. I apologize if I messed his name up. Who's bringing a lawsuit based on those algorithms and suing, but that falls into what another category you had identified over the last several months, and I'm kind of curious if you can bring me up to speed on kind of where your mind is by way of Section 230, because we're looking at these massive tech platforms that can be manipulated for absolute garbage and propaganda, right? And it's created this doom loop, and it's destroying, I think, quite frankly, the young generation who has no ability to think critically about things that are happening because they're overwhelmed with all this misinformation and disinformation. I'm curious how you kind of unpack that from your position. And then final piece of the puzzle here. Sorry to lay this all on you, but there's a lot going on, right? But let's just say you are in the Department of Justice for whatever reason. Maybe that's not fair to say at this point because I think there's a lot of work we do before we get there, because don't we have to hold this administration accountable for the racketeering it's involved with now? Can you please try to put those together with obviously your decades long experience in the trenches on this?
Well, there's a lot there. And we're starting to get the responses to our public records request to multiple federal agencies for their Palantir contracts. We're starting to trickle in, although some of them are starting to turn us down. So we're going to have to file some lawsuits to get those documents. I'm anxious to see exactly what the terms are and what they're entitled to do with that data, and how the plan to aggregate it's going to work. Because again, I actually just saw a speech by John Ossoff, who's running in Georgia for Senate, where I think for the first time I heard a Democratic office holder put all the pieces of it together. People are right to be upset that there was a corrupt system that favored the folks with the yachts over the rest of us, and that was perpetuated by both the Republicans and the Democrats. And they voted for Trump because they wanted to bring an end to that. And what Trump has done is simply redirected the grift to him, and the corruption to him, and to his benefit, and to the benefit of the people that supported him to get there. And so that, at least identifying the problem. So as cute as Gavin Newsom's tweets are, what we need is a message that's coherent. And now we have to figure out what I didn't hear him say, because maybe I didn't hear the whole speech, is what is the Democrats' solution? How are we going to do better? How are we going to speak truth to economic power when we have the opportunity to do it? Because as much as we did, we could have gone a lot further over the last 4 years. And to the extent that we did speak truth to economic power through antitrust enforcement and consumer protection enforcement, we didn't, somehow it never filtered through to the general public that we were actually doing that. And so that's the challenge: is how are we going to come up with that with that part of the message? And there were so many questions there, Patrick. Help me a little bit with
okay. Let's take it one step at a time, because you are the key component of this. Because when you have the opportunity, you got a group of guys together, led by, as I recall, Tom Murphy, right? That kind of bootstrapped it to learn what the racketeering was. Right. And when you connected the dots completely, you went to okay, where are they getting their money? And then you
Mhm.
ultimately, your jurisdiction ended in Ohio. Whereas if you guys were able to take that through the FBI to California and New York, and they did what you guys did, there would be a completely different outcome to the great financial crisis. And I don't think we'd have Donald Trump as our president right now. And like you said, and I think that was a really wonderful way to stage it, he's just doing what everybody else was already doing and just reoriented it to himself. That is an incredible epiphany. But
Mhm.
further to that point, you know, you've got the tech platforms of the algorithms, which in its own right is this section 230, and
Mhm.
you were thinking about that should become a sort of political linchpin.
Right.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, no, and I think the Democrats, in the same with the same passion they attack Citizens United, which they can't really. It's very difficult to do something about. All it takes is a majority vote of both houses of Congress and the signature of a president to eliminate Section 230 from the Federal Communications Act, and get rid of the exemption that they have. I circulated something just before this. June and Bill's Attorney General Keith Ellison has taken a step in that direction by using his power, which isn't governed by Section 230, to begin to hold the he just sued TikTok. He's already sued Facebook, and he's already sued uh, I believe Twitter as well, or whatever it's called, X, over their perpetuation of false information. It's a consumer fraud in action that we watch. All this false information is going out, and it's harming people, and I think it's actionable under and AGs so have some authority. So it's nice to see Gavin Newsom tweeting, and there's we can watch this double-edged sword of gerrymandering that's going on, and I do think that might come back to cut us on the other side of it. Um, uh, but if we could get the California AG to take on the same fight, and the New York AG to take on that fight, um, that would go to the heart of the problem. And I think the courts are still holding enough that they would be able to be success, that they will be ultimately successful in that. But what will happen, or I fear will happen, is that will be lobbied out of it, or into some lame settlement with those folks, because of the immense campaign contribution pressure that they're going to put on the folks that are involved. I hope that that's not true, but there's a method. It's a lot harder to do it from the outside in. And honestly, even if we win the presidency in 2028, and Bill and June can speak more to this, it's going to take years to restaff the Justice Department with competent people. What the result have been, anybody who can find another job is gone. All the competent people are gone from the Justice Department, from the Department of Labor, from the Federal Trade Commission, from the CFPB. They are gone. They are gone because they don't want to be in a position where they're going to have to compromise their integrity or get fired. And they have families to take care of, and they're gone. So there's an entire, and I think they were bragging yesterday. There are 300,000 fewer federal employees now than on January 20th. And the worst part of that, not that there shouldn't be 300,000 less employees, but it's ass backwards. The people that they forced out, or who were easy to force out, were the ones that could do something else. And unfortunately, it's a self-fulfilling nightmare of the Republican and conservative nightmare that government workers are terrible, lazy people who don't want to do anything, because they've essentially purged these agencies of everybody competent. So, and doing it from the outside is going to require the attorneys general. It's going to require some creative lawyering. I'm just determined to come up with a theory on Palantir and the privacy violations that they're about to commit, or maybe already are committing. But I got to have information, because I still believe in the rule of law. Oh, by the way, they gave me a koozie yesterday that says "committed to the rule of law." I don't know if you can see that. So I can get those if anybody wants them. So at least since I'm keeping my beer cold, I can remind people of the importance. But but that's what's going to have to happen, because if any other company contracting with another private company were to exploit people's private information without their consent in the way that they're contemplating doing it with Palantir, it would be a multi-billion dollar lawsuit, and even sufficient to put Palantir on its heels. And that's what needs to be brought. I'm going to need a lot of help when we get there, but I want to at least I believe we have to put the facts in front of the court rather than just our suspicions about what's happening. And that's what makes this harder, because we're different than they are, because they don't want that. By the way, I also mentioned the mortgage fraud claims they're making against all these people. There is an absolute bar on anybody in the FHFA or Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac using data in a mortgage application for their own benefit. It is not, there is no legal basis on which people are looking at Letitia James's and Adam Schiff's and who was the third one? There was another one. The poor woman who had the bad fortune of being on the Federal Reserve Board, looking at their mortgage files. Set aside the fact that what they did is not wrong. I mean, it's at different times in one's lives, you can live in two places at one time. Many people do. Many people commute to different cities, have families have their spouses with jobs in different cities, or people buy a nice house that they love, and the next week they get transferred, to the other side of the country, and rather than sell that house, they decided to rent it out. Good capitalism there, right? Perfectly legal thing to do, and that's the case with Schiff and with Letitia James and with with the Federal Reserve governor. But nobody's asking the question of what the fuck are they doing in these people's files?
Well, that's a great question to lead into Bill, to close us out here. But Bill, to the point that I was making earlier, and boy, thank you for covering all of that. Boy, you got a lot in there, Marc. But
none of which answered your questions. I apologize. But
no, you did. But at the same time, though, I have to recalibrate this for Bill, though, because in Marc's investigation, they went to the bank. They went to the bank to explore how they were involved with what led to the racketeering involved with Dave Willen on a $80 million Midwestern case that was basically the foundation of what we were seeing on Wall Street. But here we were with Letitia James, Bill, right? And we just saw the $450 million civil fine, being evaporated because, it was supposedly egregious. But when we looked at that case with Letitia James, she never understood control fraud. I mean, she understood appraisal fraud. She understood the bank fraud, I suppose, but she never understood Deutsche Bank's role in the control fraud. And ultimately, that's what Marc was able to, zero in on as the last piece of that particular puzzle. Do you find yourself, I don't know, willing to express kind of the mistake of Letitia James, and ironically, that left them vulnerable for retribution in this kind of, this insanity of irony?
So, yeah, people don't understand what makes elite CEOs the not apex predators, right? So apex predators, when you think of them, it's the lion on the savannah, right? And they kill maybe 20 prey animals a year, type of thing. The lioness has killed more, but the most powerful predator doesn't do all that much. We're talking about the paramount predators. These are the predators that control not just businesses, but governments as well, that make sure they can predate with impunity, which is variants of what we've all been discussing. And this is why elite white collar criminals are are not simply a steal tons of money. They kill and maim more people than blue collar criminals, and it ain't even close, right? And it hasn't been close for centuries in all of this regard. So we consistently misidentify the folks that we need to be going after as the scions of society and such that the politicians want to be going after to get contributions. And we miss the whole creation of predatory networks and how they overlap. And you don't need a conspiracy. You just hire a top tier audit firm, and that partner, that's his ticket, right? He's not about to give you an adverse opinion. You go to the credit rating agencies. They could say no, but then you go to the other two. And what happens? You still do all the sleazy stuff, and they get none of the proceeds themselves. So what's going to happen if you've got only three major players? Everybody can figure out the strategy, right? You either play ball with Wall Street and give AAA ratings and make a ton of money yourself, and you do it with impunity. You're not even sued, not even civilly. You're not subject to even administrative sanction. Hell, you're barely subject to a congressional hearing. So back to the Federal Reserve stuff, tying this in. Tom Hoenig was the longtime president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. And for weird reasons, I ended up at this dinner. There were only 20 people present, type of thing. And he wasn't under Chatham House rules that restrict, what you can report on what people said. And he just said flat out, for the last quarter century, we've been running an auction on who could run Treasury. And for the last 25 years, Goldman Sachs has won that bidding war. Okay? That's a conservative Republican, pro-business guy. What June was pointing out is the hot areas in the legal academy. Where were people thinking that we needed to change, and where the academy and the rule of law had been gutted by right-wing academics? Antitrust. The new antitrust, this is now, Bork, 35, 40 years old, so it's not all that new, has triumphed in most of the world, such that you effectively can't bring an antitrust case successfully unless it's an express agreement to form a cartel, right? And even there, we got lots of prosecutions because the United States is different, and we would actually have visual proof. We plant a bug in the room where the cartel folks were doing this stuff. Right? What happened when we had really, really good officials start to warn us about what was happening? Well, that would be Brooksley Born. You remember Brooksley Born from The Con, right? She says, wait a minute, you're talking about allowing people to do any kind of financial derivative with any kind of client. This is insane. We don't know these risks. And she didn't start a rulemaking. She started an inquiry. Just let's learn the facts. And within 48 hours, the 13 most powerful bankers in America were in the offices of that Treasury Secretary. And within an hour, the administration, this is a Democratic administration, mind you. This is Clinton, orders their own appointee to run the CFTC, Commodities Future Trading Commission, Brooksley Born, to quash all that. And then they pass legislation that is so extreme, so totally openly written by the lobbyists, that it actually even said, you're not even subject to the gambling laws. State law can't be used. What happens when folks like Marc Dan brought the only effective actions in the run-up to the great financial crisis? Instantly, they're working with the chief counsel and then acting head of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And what does she issue? She issues edicts of preemption that say, not only will we, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, not take any action to prevent this coming catastrophe and this epidemic of fraud and predation, we are going to preempt all state entities, particularly state AGs, from taking even investigative actions. Think how radical and obscene that was. And who was that under in major part? Well, that was under, Democrats as well as Republican administrations. That policy stayed the same. As June was explaining, where were we starting to get some effective push from Obama? Well, it was on things like a new antitrust, a new policies towards labor, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which under the prior Trump became an ally of the fraudsters and the looters, right? And so you started to get this pushback. Why did Trump prioritize those three areas? Because these donors came in and said, again, in the savings and loan debacle is when we learned it as financial regulators, and my line again was the highest return on assets is always a political contribution. It is vastly cheaper never to face the litigation, never to face the investigation by going to the politicians of both parties. And this is again why we always emphasize it ain't enough to worry about a current king. It's the robber barons, and it ain't just the robber barons under Republicans. Almost everything I've said has been the robber barons under Democrats, right? Because why? Because it's chump change from the perspective of a corporation to give what to a politician is staggering amounts of money. The two worlds are so incredibly different. And that's what they do, right? And it doesn't always work. Marc proved that. Minnesota AG proved that. Iowa AG, the Illinois AG. You want the success stories? And I want to say both, they're staggering and they're modest relative to the size of the great financial crisis. So all of these guys and gals, there were women in senior positions as state AGs and as key attorneys, they put their bodies in the line. And mostly they were politically crushed because they were effective, because they did their job. That was the best way to get crushed by your opponents getting suddenly massive amounts of money to seek to defeat you. But they still, as brave and as good as they were tiny, tiny, tiny compared to the scope of the great financial crisis that was coming and the amount of money involved. So these institutions are essential. This is when it scares them to death, when we create something like the CFPB, when we create something like the criminal referral process, when we create special units and task forces that convict 7,000 financial executives of felonies, 7,000 of them, that put roughly 600 top CEOs and COOs in prison after the Enron. That has you noticed that in the great financial crisis? Yeah, the number's a lot closer to zero than anything else, despite all these efforts by the states, because their resources and their scope of action, because of this federal preemption, their biggest fight was against what should have been their greatest allies. It was the folks whose duty it was to prevent these things that crushed them. June.
You're silent, June.
Patrick would like to wrap up, and I'm passing it on to you.
Oh, well, thank you. Look, there's so much there, Bill, and everybody else, but I do want to, I want to close with this real quick, even though it just, guys, you have to like and subscribe and share this, and you have to tap into these stories out there. We're revealing to you, and then some, with all of these truth bomb riffs, the new untouchables, and the more to come. And of course, I'll work the con, and I'll give you all of that information in a second. But I want to wrap it up like this. It always seems like all roads go through Ohio for whatever reason, Marc. and where I'm sitting right now. So a lot of what was discussed here, spans decades, right? And so at the moment, we know that Trump is going to release whatever Democratic sort of, configuration with Epstein, when meanwhile we have seen that because of Les Wexner, because of Leo Black, because of some of these other elements that were in Columbus, Ohio, for example, and all things that it has been revealed recently, that there was a fund that Epstein managed called Liquid that was getting international funds that seems to come from criminal enterprises, which I think if we had the forensics, a lot of it seems to be coming through Deutsche Bank, i.e. Russia, i.e. Putin, that was actually flooded into subprime mortgages that then when the whole thing bailed out or blew up, the 13 banks that Bill Black was just referencing, they were there with Paulson and Geithner, right? And that was the first maiden lane. This stuff never ends. And so what I'm just suggesting is that to the American people listening to this, the opportunity that Trump has basically become the vector of what's been going on for the last 30 years, he's just saying, run it through me. Yeah. He's the emperor's new clothes. If we can turn the tables and take that down, we could potentially turn the tables on what's created this minefield, this disaster of our country, of our markets, of our intellectual integrity, and so on and so forth, and everything this country is supposed to represent. So anyway, on that note, obviously we could talk forever. We'll talk next time. You guys have a wonderful day. Everybody check out thecon.tv, check out thenewuntouchables.com, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys, for joining. All the best.